Jen by Bob Carroll, illustrated by Cheryl Kirknall. Chapter 1, Free. The morning she was to be questioned, Jen climbed down from the top bunk where she slept with her little sister, Lee May. "Where are you going, Jen?" whispered Lee May. "I want to go too." "Shh! You'll wake up Mama. Come if you want, but be quiet." The two girls silently scrambled down past their mother's bunk. Their mother turned restlessly. The girls tiptoed between the rows of the beds in the big wooden house. The beds were filled with many sleeping women and children. The girls had lived in this huge room ever since arriving at Angel Island in the United States. It was called a barracks. It was even more crowded than the ship that brought them from China. The two girls were bored with life in the barracks. They had to stay inside for most of the day. The Americans didn't want any Chinese people going to the United States without permission. Mrs. Chow said that even if Angel Island wasn't a prison, it sometimes felt like one. Jen, however, had found a secret way out. In the corner of the barracks was a loose board in the floor. When Jen removed it, there was just enough room for a child to squeeze through. Jen and Lei Mi crept to the corner of the room. Jen pulled the loose board out of the floor and squeezed through the hole. Then she helped her sister slide down through the opening. "It's still dark, Jen," said Lee May. "Not for long," whispered Jen. "Now hold on to my jacket and follow me. And be quiet." They began to crawl. It was damp and smelly under the building. Lee May began to complain, but soon the girls were standing in the dim light of the morning. The ghostly sounds of the foghorns filled the harbor. Angel Island itself, however, was quiet. It seemed deserted. Soon the boat would bring the island workers from San Francisco. Jen and Lee May would then have to hurry back. They were not allowed to leave the barracks without permission, but it was worth the risk. Jen loved these opportunities to get away from the crowded barracks. Jen remembered the days in the damp belly of the ship. She remembered the confusing arrival on the island. These mornings of peace were important to her. Chapter 2, The Gateway to the Pacific. Jen led Lee May to the dock. From there, the sisters could look out over San Francisco Bay. "See that big shape out there?" Jen asked. "That's San Francisco. That's where Father is." "Why can't we go see Father in San Francisco?" Lee May asked. "The Americans want to be sure that we really are Father's family," said Jen. "Of course we are," laughed Lee May. "But these people don't know us, Lee May. We have to convince them that we are telling the truth." "But why?" Lee May asked loudly. "I don't know," whispered Jen. "Keep your voice down." Lee May looked hurt. "I'm sorry, Jen. I just want to see Father." "Be patient, Lee May. Someday we will cross the border into the United States, and Father will be waiting." Jen tried to sound sure of herself, but she was worried. The law allowed her father to bring his family to the United States. Sometimes, however, people pretended, so the Americans asked a lot of questions to be sure that you are really you. This seemed strange to Jen. How do you prove that you are really a family? She hoped that she would be able to pass the test. "I wish we didn't have to wait for so long," said Lee May. "We've been here for weeks." Jen nodded. She had overheard Mrs. Chow talking about boycotts of the American goods in China. Jen asked Mrs. Chow what a boycott was. She was told a boycott is when people refuse to buy something from someone. Mrs. Chow thought that boycotts sometimes made people change the laws. Now there were laws that were meant to keep Chinese people out of the United States. If they were changed, Chinese people would have an easier time coming to the United States. "Tell me a story, Jen," cried Mei Lee. "Shh, no stories. I have things to think about." Lee May always wanted a story. Jen felt as if she had told Lee May 1,000 stories since leaving China. Jen understood, though. Lee May was little. She needed some fun in life. For months now, she had been cramped in the damp steamship that stunk in the barracks. Jen's stories were Lee May's only pleasure. Now that she thought about it, it was the only fun Jen had, too. "I'll tell you a story after breakfast," said Jen, "but only if you're quiet now." The girls sat quietly on the dock watching the seagulls soar. Then Jen heard the boat that brought her friend, Big Quan, and the other cooks to the island from San Francisco. Soon, Big Quan would have breakfast ready. He might even have a letter from her father. "We have to get back here before everyone wakes up," Jen says. The sisters hurried back. They crawled under the barracks and up through the hole in the floor. Their mother was sleeping peacefully when they returned to the beds. Chapter 3, The Cook and the Poet and the Letter. Each day after breakfast, the women and children were allowed out of the barracks for exercise. Jen ran as fast as she could to the Island's kitchen. Big Quan was standing in the kitchen's back door. He was wiping his forehead with a towel. It was hard work cooking for hundreds of people. Pots and kettles crashed together. Jen could hear the sounds of Quan's helpers cleaning in the kitchen. Jen thanked Quan for the cooking her breakfast. "You're welcome, Jen." The big man's voice boomed like a cannon. Then he looked around and whispered, "I have something for you." Big Quan gave Jen a piece of folded paper. "It's from your father. Give it to your mother right away." Jen tucked the paper into her pocket. "Thank you, Quan," she said as she ran off. Jen ran to find her mother. She couldn't wait to hear her read the letter from her father. She hoped that he would tell them when they would be able to join him in San Francisco. But she stopped as she passed another barracks. The door was open. Inside, a man was carving Chinese characters on the wall with a small knife. Jen came closer. The whole wall was covered with words. Jen asked the man what he was writing. "It's a poem," he says. "It tells how I feel waiting here, locked up, missing my family. It tells my hopes and dreams for the future." The man didn't look away from his work as he spoke. Jen asked him why he was carving the poem on the wall. "Someday, when I'm gone," he said, "another man will be here in my place. I want him to know that I came this way too, so that he will not give up hope." Jen's eyes moved over the carvings on the wall. "It's as if you will be here to help him," Jen said. The man looked up at her for the first time and smiled. "That's right," he said. "This poem will tell others many years from now what we suffered in order to come to this new land." "Why don't you write a poem on paper?" Jen asked. The man laughed. "I have no paper, no pen, but this is better. These words are cut into the walls. As long as these walls stand, they will be here. They will last a long time." Jen traced the words carved into the wall with her finger. "Can you read?" the man asked. Jen nodded. As she read the words of the poem, Jen shivered with excitement. She felt people moving across the face of the world. For a moment, Jen understood that she and her family and this poet were all part of something very big. How strange, she thought. Someday in 100 years, someone else will touch these words too. Jen thanked the poet, and then she ran off to deliver her father's letter. Jen's mother read the sisters the letter from her father. "My dear family," he wrote, "an officer from the United States government was here. He asked many questions about our village in China and our lives here. I answered with the truth, and I know you will do the same. If you do, I know we will be together soon. I have heard that there are boycotts of American goods in China to get decent treatment for our people here. Many things will get better for us. Have courage and hope." Jen's mother folded the note and put it away. Then she said, "Girls, answer carefully today. People are sent back if they get these questions wrong. Your father is counting on you to be strong." Jen now felt that her family's happiness depended on her. It was almost time to go to the barracks. Jen saw Mrs. Schwartz coming toward them. Mrs. Schwartz was the most important American Jen knew. She was in charge of the women and the children on the island. Chapter 4, The Test. "The immigration officers are ready to see you," Mrs. Schwartz said. Before Jen could stop her, Lee May asked, "Why is it so hard to get into America?" Mrs. Schwartz wasn't angry. She just laughed. "There are unions of workers in the United States who are afraid that you will take their jobs," she said. "But we just want to be with Father, Lee May." "I know," said Mrs. Schwartz, "but in order to prevent strikes and other troubles, the government has made it difficult for the Chinese to enter the country. Come on now, the immigration board is waiting." And with that she turned and led the little family to meet its biggest test. Jen ran to catch up with Mrs. Schwartz. "Excuse me, ma'am, what will they ask us on this test?" "It's not a test, Jen," said Mrs. Schwartz. "Just some questions to make sure you're not a paper daughter." Jen knew what a paper daughter was, someone who pretended to be a citizen's daughter. This way she could get into the United States. "But I'm not," she said. "We're a real family." "Of course you are, dear," said Mrs. Schwartz. but we need to make sure. Many people want to get into the United States, and some are breaking the law to do it. Jen could tell the woman had other things on her mind. Will I be with my mother? Jen asked her. No, said Mrs. Schwartz. You'll each go to the board alone. That way we'll know if you're telling the truth. Don't worry so much. Everything will be fine. Jen wasn't sure of that at all. The men questioned Jen for a long time. The men sat behind a long table. 2 of the men were officers. One of the officers had glasses perched on the end of his nose. The sun was shining on the glasses so that Jen could not see the man's eyes. He frightened Jen a little. The men asked so many questions that Jen couldn't keep track of them all. They asked Jen to describe her house. Were there any steps up to the front door? How many windows did her house have? Who is old Ming? An officer asked. He's an old farmer, Jen told him, but now he's too old to work and he has no family, so everyone in the village helps him out. What happened to his family? Jen froze. She didn't know the answer. She didn't want to get the answer wrong. She was tempted to make up a story like the one she had made up for Li Mei. But then she remembered that her father said she should always tell the truth. I don't know, Jen said. My whole life, old Ming has always been by himself. The men stared at her. Jen started to tremble. Suddenly, the man wearing glasses said, Little girl, could you tell me where the well is in your village? After a moment, Jen said, There is no well in our village. No well? No water? He asked. Are you sure about that? He looked like an angry bird. For a moment, Jen was afraid. Yes, sir, said Jen. The well is just outside our village, not in our village. We have to carry the water a long way. I know because that's my job. You're sure about that? The man asked again. Jen thought he was trying to get her to change her mind. The strange thing was, Jen was tempted to do just that. She wanted the man to smile and say, Good answer, Jen. Luckily, she remembered what her father had said and stuck to the truth. Yes, sir, I'm sure. The man stared at her for a moment. Then he nodded and wrote something down. Jen was sitting on the edge of her mother's bunk. She felt very sad. She had a sick feeling that she had failed the test. Jen didn't know whether they had answered the men in the way they had wanted. How could she? She didn't know these men or what they liked. Jen went over the test in her mind. She couldn't think of any moment where the immigration officer seemed pleased or friendly. What could she do? Jen, don't look so unhappy. Jen looked up and saw Mrs. Schwartz standing over her. I'm afraid we'll never get into the United States, Jen said sadly. Cheer up, said Mrs. Schwartz told her. You don't think I was always an American citizen, do you? No, we came to the United States from Germany. I was just about your age, but I never gave up, and look at me. Jen looked at Mrs. Schwartz. Why was this woman so cheerful, she wondered. Better start packing, Jen, Mrs. Schwartz said. You're going to the United States. The end.